So as we start to think about the future of work, I thought it'd be useful for us to talk a little bit about the current state of our Canadian labor market as it is today, right? And so here we are. We are at the beginning of April. The latest stats that we are kind of looking at come from February. Primarily, the information that we're talking about is from Statistics Canada. And Vivek knows I'm like hyper focused on Canadian context
True.
and Canadian
100%.
data because we want to be able to support people in the KW area. We want to support Canadians, and we also know that Canada is not just a little USA. We have our
I agree.
own, a very different country. We have our own unique customs laws and opportunities that really change the way that things are coming. And so we thought that we would talk a little bit about that now. So
Yes.
this next bit might be like a little bit of a like heavy data or heavy stats, and I am looking at another screen because I can't have all this memorized. So I've got some facts to look at. So I hope that's okay. And then we'll kind of go from there. But we thought that was really important to really kind of understand like where are we now in Canada in terms of labor, in terms of work, if we are going to start to talk about what trends we see and solutions that we think might be helpful to address the things that we're seeing. So that's why we thought let's talk a little bit about the current state of the Canadian labor market. So in February, the number was recently released. It was released mid-March. So every month in about the middle of the month, Statistics Canada releases what our unemployment rate is. And so in February, the employment fell by 84,000 jobs. 84,000 jobs. And that the employment rate rose to 6.7%. And the declines were concentrated in a couple of key areas, mostly around full-time work, youth, and some province-centric sort of pieces. So let's unpack these just a little bit and sort of kind of go from there. So to keep in mind, first off, the employment fell again for the second consecutive month. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything in particular. It could mean I like to call myself a bit of an armchair economist. If I could go back to school again, I'd probably do labor economics because I find it so fascinating. So this just to me is like it's the Lisa version of the unemployment information. I think it takes 3 months of like consecutive slow growth to be in an official recession, and we're not quite there yet. I think the Canadian economy has sort of teetered for a while on some of these things. What is interesting is that sort of on a year over year, there has been very little change in the unemployment rate. And I think the numbers show some things that are rather interesting. So who was most affected by the decline in employment in the last little while? And the primary number or the primary group that was affected is our youth. And this is the one that sort of keeps me up at night because I have, three kiddos, two of which are in post-secondary, looking for those early experience jobs that, we just talked about. Those
Yes.
foundational early experience jobs really teach us some critical skills that take us through our careers, right?
They're as good as a extended, I feel like an extended education, right?
Yeah,
The
that's right. Yeah, that's
most
right.
one-on-one skills of a workplace.
Yeah. So sadly, the youth unemployment rate jumped to 16.3% in February. And, we know that racialized youth often face a very much more significantly, like when you drill down those numbers, they're significantly high. Our Black youth are facing a 23.2%. And I came across an article from CBC. This was dated on March the 21st, 2026, so just a few weeks ago. And the title was 20 Other People Just Like You, Why Toronto Youth Are Struggling to Find Jobs. And it's startling to think that for every advertised job, 20 people are applying for that job, right? And
I
so those early youth employment rates are really important to set a person up for success in the long run.
On this particular point, Lisa, just to chip in something from my end, you spoke about the 20 job seekers per advertised job. I recollect what the homework I was doing an year back when we were conversing
Mm.
on the previous version of what we are building right now, which was plain and simple helping job seekers and hiring managers engage in a more different shorter format than go through the application tracking system and the resume and all the long process. And one of the things which I could notice at the time was I was actively on LinkedIn looking for opportunities at the time. And my friends and my college batchmates were doing the same. And we would notice that you look at a job post on actively on LinkedIn, and at one point there'll be like 20, within like 4 hours it'll turn to 100, and the next 2 to 3 days you're looking at 1,000 people applied, kind of a situation. So that is factual, like when you say like the amount of job versus the amount of job seekers looking out for that
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really striking was that just in September of 2025, the youth unemployment rate was the highest it has been, excluding the pandemic. I don't know if you were here in Canada in 2020, but this was a brutal time for people in 2020 when everything just shut down and everybody lost their jobs. And so it's kind of striking to see that this youth unemployment rate is the highest that it has been in 15 years, excluding the pandemic, right? So those are
That's bad.
pretty challenging. So we're also sort of seeing tariff issues continuing to linger because there has been some sectors that are showing particular declines as well. The service producing sectors, some largest losses were under, sort of wholesale and retail trade, which again sort of is surprising, or it's not surprising given sort of the trade issues that are lingering. The goods producing services are also sort of overall down in terms of construction and manufacturing. What's really interesting though is the decision um, to sort of kind of close the doors to immigration, right? And this I want to talk a little bit about because this is around population growth versus labor demand. So, post pandemic, as part of a post pandemic recovery, was the push to bring in lots and lots of people because there was a steady stream of employers saying, we need people, we need people, we need people. We had this sort of rapid rebound post pandemic. We saw this huge population growth in 2022, 2020, sorry, 2024. That increase in labor force rapidly outpaced job creation, right? So you have a post pandemic recovery, employers demanding the need for people, bringing in a lot of people, jobs can't keep up, right? However, as the governments have shifted and policies have changed, we've now seen population growth not even just stall, but actually kind of like stagnate and recede. And so there's this sort of thing called a break even point
Hmm.
where there are fewer jobs needed to keep up with this unemployment rate. But really, it's kind of deceiving, right? Because if we have a declining population and then we have job losses, then it might not result in better unemployment rates. It might seem as though that there's a better unemployment rate, but really when you look at the bigger picture, it also means that there is a lot of job losses, right? That there may be a lot of job losses, there may be a lot of, weak economic growth, and the unemployment rate will decline anyways, right? So it might seem like a bit of false hope that the unemployment rate is getting better, but actually what it is we have less people, right?
Totally.
Yeah, we
Yes.
have less people. And so what we might see, I don't know because I'm not a policy expert. I don't know, but there might be some pressure um in terms of of sort of revisiting the immigration policy, like reevaluating the immigration policies because those employers will say, look, we still have labor shortages. We still can't find the right people, right? So there might be some really interesting things happening in the next year or so that really is pointing to some of these other underlying things, a shrinking population. Also, the other one is that the baby boomers are retiring, right? So as the baby boomers, which there are lots and lots and lots of them, exit the labor market, we have a declining population. Even though we have weak economic growth, the unemployment rate might look good, but really it's because of some of these underlying issues. And the real issue is where are we at with skills and skills to match what employers need, right?
Yeah, kind of considering that, Lisa, you covered some interesting starting from the the some roles or some industries where there is unemployment, the growth, right? My wife is working in the automobile segment, and though they were not, the organization wasn't affected. I've read about a lot of big plans which had gone down, from operations, and that is like rapid jump in the unemployment number on that side.
Wow.
Huge manpower, I know, employment losses. And the youth unemployment part is also interesting because I think the most recent happiness index kind of also was overlapping with that the Canadian youth were more unhappy at this current age. Probably it's a resonation of what's happening out in this career space, right? Where they are starting out and moving in. And the last bit on this break even part, I kind of traveled in that space in that period of time when you mentioned. You were very right when you said 20. I came in 22, and I was part of that huge influx of newcomers or students and other support open work permit spouses who had moved in, and that probably it kind of created more of supply and less of demand kind of a situation. Eventually, with this tariff and the little slowdown in the economy which was already persistent, kind of created a environment where it even spiked the unemployment further. And there were some course corrections, I think, which happened over the last year or so. I've met so many students whom I interact with when I'm out and engage, or newcomers. So now they are kind of sometimes saying it's a positive sign because they are getting opportunities
Right.
because there's lesser people out here. But like you pointed out, when the baby boomer retirements go up and the population growth, as you said, is declining over the year, the next year would be difficult because with this tariff, there's a lot of momentum or acceleration from the government's end to build the interstate,
Right.
inter-province, economy. And there's need of a lot of labor for that.
That's right.
So you pointed it right. There's going to be upskilling factors coming in, whether they are the right skilled and stuff. And on top of all this, you have the AI layer,
That's
you know,
right.
some drastic shifts. So I think, I think we are in a time, like you said, that the policies will have to be aligned considering all these factors. And you might be right. Like there could be some drastic policy shifts in the coming year to
Yeah.
accommodate these things.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where things go. We do know though that some of those early career experiences, just sort of shifting back to the youth, the early career experiences for young people really set the tone for their success a little bit later on in life. Because if they can get in, they can start to build skills in terms of their in terms of their field and in terms of their background, then it's going to and get some money. There's a trickle down effect, right? And that is that they're building skills. Okay, obviously they're paying their student loans, right? They're paying for the education, right? And then as they build skills, they get more opportunities, and then they get more opportunities. And then what does a young person typically do after they graduate from school? Well, they typically find partners. They start to move into another phase of life, which is around, buying homes and sort of getting themselves to be a little bit more of those, those stable, living situations, right? Where they're buying homes, they have consumer money that they can spend, right? That they can get into. And all of these things really help propel them for the future. If they don't have these opportunities now, then it gets really tricky for them to kind of meet those particular milestones that are useful, not just for them as like human beings to develop as people, but also like for, economic signals, right? There's this a couple of really great people on LinkedIn. We can give out some resources a little bit later on, but there's some great people on LinkedIn and different places that sort of talk about that from a bigger perspective as well. So I think it's really important to sort of think about, how is our labor market shifting? What are some of the responses to that? And actually, That was really interesting. My daughter is living this, right? Because she's looking for her first co-op experience. And she thought for a while it's going to be like easy peasy, sort of lemon squeezy. She was going to be in, she's going to get her job, and she's going to be good to go. She started early. She started in January. She's got a tracking list of the places. I'm sure she's applied to hundreds of jobs, if not like hundreds of jobs. And it's a struggle. Like she's got about a month left of school before she's ready to do her first job. And we've talked a lot about this. We've talked about approaches and sort of what to do. And she finally said, I'm going to have to just make peace with the labor market. And I was like, oh my God, Megan, that is brilliant. It's around helping them to pivot to the things that they need to be doing to get to where they want to go, rather than continuing to have these expectations that she's going to get, an engineering co-op job making 35 bucks an hour right off the bat. Like that's just not going to happen, right? So, she's been making peace with the labor market by looking at a broader set of opportunities, by looking at different geographical locations, by applying to different things, and even, building, plan B, plan C, plan D, right? To be able to kind of get to where she needs to go.
Right. I think that's a valid point of uh, you shared, because the environment has kind of changed, right? The ecosystem is shifting, like whatever we covered so far, and what you spoke about how your daughter is navigating and making that pivot. Okay, let's not look at the most standard way how things are done, and let's look at evolved ways of finding those opportunities and having those plan B, plan C. I think we are at a point where every day today, because of this AI being also becoming an influencing layer, it's expecting us to make those changes. Or else, like, if I mean, I hear some thought leaders who kind of put it as a tsunami kind of an effect. You don't know that the waves are, you know, going in order to come back,
Right.
right? And it's best time to go to the uphills or find the path and navigate at this point. So good
Yeah.
point of view on that.